Mr. Ron Howard and his leading men from the film, Chris Hemsworth and Daniel Bruhl.
How are you?
Hello, how are you?
Hello.
How are you?
I'm great. I thought you were going to take a picture of
I
them,
am
but
going
you-
to. I'm
Amazing.
taking a picture of everybody. Yeah. I think
There we
Twitter-friendly
go. You
crowd,
love it.
I'd
You're
say.
mad for it, aren't you?
Yeah.
Was he like this in filming, constantly tweeting whilst
Yeah,
you
we
were-
shot the whole movie on the iPhone. Thanks, Apple.
Welcome along today, gentlemen. Got so much to talk about. Congratulations. I'm one of the lucky ones who's seen this film, and it's spectacular.
Oh, thank you very much.
Ron, if we can start with you. We've seen already through your creativity, your portrayal of real stories, real events, real people. What was it about this particular story that was attractive for you?
It was the combination of qualities. First of all, the characters were so unique, so entertaining, and I thought, cool. They were unlike characters that I'd ever really dealt with before in a movie. I thought the 70s was something that, while I'd done a couple of movies, Frost Nixon, Apollo 13, that were set in the 70s, they were just an anecdote. They were just a little factor in those. Here, I thought this story couldn't really happen any era other than the 70s. And I remember that period. That was just the moment when Happy Days was exploding, and it was sort of the first American comedy that really took off all over the world. And so I knew what the 70s felt like in Europe and in other places, and I thought we could depict that. But it was also that I felt like that in the director's toolkit, there was enough technological advancement in the last few years that I thought that for the first time ever, you could actually recreate Formula One in a way that was authentic, visceral, that I could sort of try to do with Formula One what we were able to achieve with Apollo 13, which meant a lot to me. But again, combine something that really belonged on the big screen with really cool, interesting characters. So it's a thinking person's entertainment, but it demands to be seen and felt and experienced on the big screen. And so I just thought it was a rare combination, really a chance to make a unique movie.
And were you aware of these men prior to,
No, I mean, I didn't. Peter Morgan started to tell me about it. We had done Frost Nixon.
Yeah.
I immediately knew that, these kinds of extreme rivals, that he would write them in a way that was, typical Peter Morgan. It would be smart, it would be funny, it would be, unsentimental and yet emotional. But I think as I saw Chris and Daniel begin to develop the characters, part of the thing that I began to appreciate was that these guys were absolute individualists. And I think if this movie actually celebrates anything, there are no good guys, there are no bad guys, but you have to look at it and say, man, they did it their way. And they didn't bend from that.
Yeah.
And I think there's something really honorable about that.
Well, before we meet our leading men, let's take a look at the first time they meet, before they even step into Formula One. This is a scene from the film. This chemistry between these two men, which was more than rivalry, wasn't it? It was more than competitiveness. It was Chris. How would you describe the relationship, and also how would you describe James?
The interesting thing was when I, first read the script and started doing research about this character and these guys, the contrasting and difference in opinions about who James was and about, he was this, rock star of the 70s and Formula One and slept with thousands of women and drank and smoked his way through that period. But there was, depending on who you spoke to, different versions of that. Some said that was built up by the media, or some said there was a vulnerability or a darkness to this guy. But the contradictions that would play within that guy, kind of fascinated me. And the relationship with Niki and James, there was this incredible rivalry, but there was a real yin and yang that existed between the two of them. And Niki had something James didn't, and James envied, and I think vice versa. And
They almost kind of needed each other, didn't they, in a way?
absolutely, I think they both brought out something within the other one and forced them into, to be the best they could at whatever it was they were doing on and off the track. I think they both forced the other one to question, their motives in life and the way they raced.
Yeah. Daniel, for you, you had the luxury, I imagine, of Niki being around to, or maybe it wasn't a luxury, maybe it was terrifying. I don't know. Tell us of having him there to approach. Did you, and how was that? What was the first
It
meeting
was
like?
frightening at first because, as you will see in the movie, he is not very diplomatic. So I remember the first conversation on the phone. He said to me, "Well, I guess we have to meet now." And I said, "Well, would be good. So then come to Vienna, but just bring hand luggage in case we don't like each other. You can piss off right away." So I said, "Okay." So I went to Vienna with my tiny little bag, and fortunately I had to buy some extra clothes in Vienna because, I
Didn't have to
to
piss off.
no. And he even took me to Brazil to a Grand Prix to meet drivers, and he was very, very gentle, and he supported all of us all the way through.
Yeah.
Even when we were shooting, we could call him anytime
Yeah.
if we had any doubts or questions. So
Yeah. Well, one time we were getting ready. I had a bunch of cameras. One day I had as many as 30 cameras on the grid starts. So and this is logistically, it's crazy. A limited amount of time. We got everybody there in their cars, and we're getting ready to roll. And I'm looking over, and Daniel's going like this. And I look and I see he's in the cockpit of the car, but he's got his cell phone up there. And I realized that he was calling Lauda because he was trying to figure out whether he's supposed to put his helmet on first and then the gloves, or the gloves and then the helmet.
Amazing.
But those kinds of details matter to actors like this to try to get the authenticity.
Well, that's the thing about the look of the film. So much about the film is the authenticity. But does it make it easier or harder for filmmakers and for actors when you have those people still around? You obviously want to have it's your creative approach to their story, but you also want to stay true, I imagine, to as much as you can.
Yeah, I mean, James wasn't around
Yeah.
obviously when as a resource for myself. But
Yeah.
as I said before, the difference in opinion about him was, incredibly contradictory. And I remember getting to a point where I was reading articles about him and books and biographies and watching interviews and then just before we started shooting, Ron said, "Do you want to come? We're having drinks with a whole bunch of drivers and what have you from, who were in the 70s, new James, new Niki." And, it's a sort of a kick-off party to us shooting the film. And I said, "Oh, sure, I'll come along." It's the worst thing I could have done. Because I got there and every one of them had, he doesn't speak like that. Or he doesn't, he does this, he does this, and all these different opinions. And it all of a sudden kind of made me realise I got to take the approach that James did to life and to racing, which was head down, go for it, regardless of other people's opinions. Don't get caught in the what's going on out here and with everyone else, and just do what you believe is correct. And love or hate what he did, and however outrageous certain actions might have been, I think most of us have got to admire the honesty that he approached racing with and his life, which was, this is who I am, take it or leave it. A refusal to conform to some standard and then censor himself. And it's refreshing, I think, in life, especially our business, where you're constantly having to, occasionally think, should I say this or avoid that by this? And these guys didn't. Both of them, that's what they had in common. No matter how different they were at their approaches, both had this incredible honesty about, this is how I'm going to do things, and this is me, and this is my approach.
I have a question. It was never really an option because Niki Lauda is so busy, but you had that pre-production time with him. I had chances to interview him. Had he been more willing to be around the set more, do you think that would have been a plus or a minus? On Apollo 13, for example, Jim Lovell did the same kind of thing with Tom Hanks. He spent a lot of time with him, but Lovell also was very busy, and I actually didn't really want Lovell to be there, and
Right.
I think Tom felt like it would sort of inhibit him.
Yeah.
Do you think you would
You're
have?
absolutely right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, no. Twice, and it's because he's so busy and he gets bored
Yeah.
very quickly, He just visited us for 10 minutes. Okay, this is it. Yeah, good. Bye. This is boring. But fortunately, it is so big because you're absolutely right. That would have, would have disturbed me to have him around. It was good to have him and to call him and, to get his advice, but not having him hanging around on set.
But when we screened, Peter and I screened about 30 minutes of the movie. This is probably in, I don't know, January, when we were still doing post-production, sound mixing in Berlin, to the German Film Academy. A lot of people Daniel's worked with in the past, some of them, and they saw it. They were so impressed with what Daniel did, but they started saying, they asked, did we get Niki Lauda to do ADR, to loop and replace all of Daniel's dialogue
voice.
because the accent was so good.
Yeah.
And
I was gonna ask you about that.
And we said, no, it's him, and they started to argue with me about it. they didn't believe me, but that was the high praise.
How did you nail it, Daniel? How did you? What was the
I
process?
I spent
Natural
1
talent?
month in Vienna. Yeah, of course. But no, I spent 1 month in Vienna because it was a crucial thing to me, the accent, because it's so different to the German accent, and it adds that portion of arrogance, irony, and cockiness that Niki Lauda has, and the Viennese have. They're so different to us. They have a sense of humor which is so much better than ours in Germany, which is not difficult, as you know. but yeah, they're much closer to the English or so. They have a very dark sense of humor, and they're very ironic. And I wanted to nail that accent, and I had a dialect coach who helped me with that. And then the time that I spent with Niki, obviously.
Chris, what about yours? Yours is great, also.
Yeah, I
Did
mean,
you have a muse for yours?
you treat it as a, I don't know. I mean, like I think of it as a muscle you've got to train up and
Yeah.
repetition and listening to a ton of audio recordings and interviews with James and then the cadence. But it was tricky because it was not only another accent, but it was the 70s and then it was a specific period, but also area, and he was a public school boy. But then you had this. Tendency for James to kind of not want to be seen as a posh public school boy, so there was a slight roughness that he was, I think, trying to throw in there.
Well, remember at one point, some of the people, I think it was a read-through, and the some of the English producers and people who were around said, Chris's accent's perfect for James, but it's actually strange. And it is, yes, it's exactly what James sounds like on YouTube. It's technically it's fantastic, but to a modern audience, even an English audience, it is a little too polished. And so remember, we actually got the interview of his son.
Yeah, that's right.
And
just
just
a little more contemporary
and just loosened it up just a little bit.
There was someone else shooting somewhere in New York or somewhere, and they were doing an accent, and they said someone drove past and yelled out the window, "Yo, you guys shooting the movie or something?" And he said, "If I did that accent, no one would believe it's real."
Yeah.
Like that was like from that specific area.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing kind of fed into what we're doing. We're trying to, you want to do it all exactly the way it was, but you take into account, well, what's the audience you're showing it to, and does there need to be an edge to it, a contemporary kind of feel or what? So there's a lot, but in the end, it came back to you train up your instincts, and then once you're in front of the camera, you got to let that go, and it's got to just be your voice coming through.
But I've had a dozen people come up to me who said, I knew James, I raced with him, competed with him, trained under him. I was a guy last night that I met with. He tutored me in racing and so forth, and just saying that Chris completely nailed James, which is high praise.
We're going to see a little clip here right now, which is a great little scene where they're both signing autographs, but it's a good bitching scene. I like this one. There's so much comedy there as well between them, in terms of this just back and forth. It's almost like the script's almost like a race in itself in terms of and where they are. One's ahead of the other, and then the other one's out in front as well. How much the dialogue was real, from Peter talking to Niki? How much of that was real?
A lot of Niki's lines are real, and then he would build around them.
Yeah.
And there are probably a dozen or so places where there are certain phrases that he's used that are just right out of Niki. But again, Peter had a chance to interview Niki. We looked at a lot of interviews for James, and and that's more sort of invented by Peter. Although Chris was pretty aggressive about going through, poring over the interviews and finding phrases, finding words, and sometimes we'd build them into the scenes, or sometimes we'd even shoot little extra bits just to try to encompass that.
Yeah.
Boys dream driving fast cars. This is this has got to have been fun on that level. I mean, did you actually physically get involved in that? Was there that element of training as well?
And he manipulated my car. I had an accident when I first tested my Ferrari.
Yeah.
The wheel came off.
I'm going to help him find out who manipulated the vehicle. The wheel came off. It's actually true. We were doing a kind of rehearsals in a parking lot and practicing pulling in and out of the pits, and then aggressive sort of turns and what have you. And I was standing the other side of the lot watching, and Danny was going through this big kind of burnout, and the wheel comes off and starts, and then flew into the crowd of people who were standing there, and people dive out the way, and Daniel bounces on the axle, and the car was like inches away from doing a complete 180, and with his head protruding from the
Dirty
chassis.
tricks by Hunt.
Yeah. I don't know who did it. I don't know who unscrewed that wheel.
Well, then he was thinking that I did it, so that he would he would understand what a crash was all about. And so, he's a very suspicious fellow, Mr. Bruhl.
So apart from the little bits of training in a car park, I imagine there was quite a bit more involved as well.
No, there was, and a lot more than we kind of anticipated. I think you have the usual sort of safety regulations and what have you at the beginning, and the more you started shooting, and whenever we could, we'd grab pieces and it'd be like, quick, jump in the car and let's do this. And Anthony Dobmantle, who was a cinematographer, had cameras mounted, in our helmets, in the visors, all over the chassis of the car and different positions, and you see it's us in there driving, and there's a few scenes pulling into the pits, visor up, dialogue, and drive back out again. And I mean, for me, that was one of the best parts of this shoot, was being able to drive those things, which most people don't have that.
Yeah.
Or you can't access that experience if you.
I imagine it's almost a way of getting character as well, in terms of you're in their home, you're in their.
But after the movie, I learned I wouldn't be a good race driver. It's so tough. And twice I wanted to be a co-pilot with professional drivers. I did this in Le Mans and in Germany with a DTM racer. And it's incredible what these guys do.
Yeah.
So it's easy to drive fast. In Germany, we don't have limit on our Autobahn, so we can drive as fast as we want. But if something unpredictable happens, it's so difficult to get these race cars under control. It's
Ron, you're doing
tough sport.
Incredible job of making you feel like you're in the cars with them. You're really experiencing it all with them and stuff. And the authenticity of the film, in terms of, you feel like these actually races that happened. How much did you shoot? Did you use old footage? I mean,
we did use old footage in a few places in a couple of different ways. Sometimes we used it on television, when the TV screens. Sometimes we did a sort of a Forrest Gump trick, where we would have a great shot, but it was from the wrong race, or it didn't feature either Nicky or James's car. And so instead of like putting Tom Hanks next to Richard Nixon, we would put the McLaren or the Ferrari into an otherwise great shot that would suddenly help tell our story and give it scope and authenticity. And so that was very important. It definitely also influenced the aesthetic for that. But we did far more in-camera action than I ever expected we would.
Really?
Jeremy Clarkson is friends with Eric Fellner, one of the producers, and he actually recommended a couple of precision drivers that he's just known over the years, and they were able to come and just put that car at unbelievable speeds, safely. Wherever it needed to be, and it was stunning. And I always felt a little dangerous, but over and over again, I realized it was in control. But the first time that they said, "Yeah, we can touch," and they actually did a bump in camera, I thought, well, look, as a movie director, I'm thrilled. I'll be glad when we wrap.
Things changed after Nicky's accident on different levels as well. We're going to watch a scene here, which is the press conference after his accident when he gets back in the car. He almost developed a sense of humour as a coping mechanism, didn't he? After the accident, that's kind of what it felt like to me from watching the film.
Pardon?
It felt like he developed a sense of humour.
Yes,
after
he did.
the accident,
Yeah.
as a kind of coping mechanism.
Yeah, it's a self-defense, because it's so hard to live with that and to cope with it. And he is very sarcastic and ironic about it. And it's, But he's very strong. I mean, other people would have been depressed after such an experience, but he's a tough guy. He's very strong.
We're going to throw out some questions to you guys. So we have a couple of microphones, I think, either side. So if you could raise your hands nice and clearly, and we'll start the questions going. Who would like to go first?
Yeah. What do you admire most about your characters? Question.
I envy Nikki for being so straightforward. In fact, I kept Nikki's character when I wanted to complain about something on set. When the catering was bad, I said, the food is shit. Everybody was like, but I meant it. So, if somebody is so, he's so honest and so straightforward. And sometimes I would like to be a bit like that, because
Do you think he's rubbed off on you a little bit, Daniel?
Pardon? Yeah. It did. Just a little bit.
Chris, what about you?
The same thing. I mean, I was saying before about the honesty of these guys and the unwavering sort of attitude about, being who they want to be and saying exactly what they want to say and not conforming to any sort of standard that, whether it be the Formula One industry or what have you would put upon them. And whether you agree or disagree with what they say, I think you've got to admire the, that honesty. I think we all kind of censor ourselves at times, and it's I said this before, but refreshing to see guys just go, nah, this is what I think, and this is how I feel, regardless of what anyone else does. And
I always like to say that one thing I admire about the characters is that this story which is unconventional. I mean, I think people are always pleasantly surprised by this movie. If they love Formula One, they're surprised that it's as authentic and true to life as it is. If they don't care for Formula One, they don't think they like that sport. They're surprised at how suspenseful it is and how emotional it is. But partly it's because the story does not unfold in a conventional way, and that's largely because of the nature of these characters. There's so many things about this true story that you just wouldn't do in fiction. The ending wouldn't unfold the way it did. The twist, those surprises, that's not the way it would work, and the unconventional nature of it really draws people in a way. But I love the fact, and this is also something that you would probably put in a work of fiction if you were writing this. These guys didn't listen to anybody. They didn't bend to anybody. They compromised that much. Not at all. There was no Yoda guiding these guys to a higher plane of enlightenment. They lived and they bore the scars, emotional or physical, of the choices that they made. But they also really owned those triumphs, and that's unique. There's something very unique about it. There's a lot of things about them that you find are relatable, but there are some things that, as you were saying, you could wish you could be a little bit more that way. There's some qualities that just are not like you and me. It's not an everyman story. There's something else there.
And that kind of commitment too. I mean, there's in the 70s, 4 or 5 guys a year were dying. In the sport, and I mean that's gladiators sort of stuff. And you think for what? For entertainment. But the need to be good at something and prove that you are worthy or whatever that is, and that kind of commitment to anything. And these guys, as we've said, had 2 completely different approaches, but an absolute commitment, 100% of the way to it. And there was no, half sort of an effort. It was all or nothing. So.
Next question. This lady, is that quite? Yeah.
What was, if you can recall only one, the most challenging scene for you from your point of view and for you guys to perform?
Who wants to go first?
The naked scenes were pretty tough.
Oh, come on.
So we had
Hey, I wanted the movie. Sex is a big part of this movie, and I really wanted it to be sexy. And I actually kept turning to everybody, and I said, "Look, nobody's going to expect me to make a hot scene. This got to be a fucking hot scene. Come on, how do we do it?"
and one would turn to me and I'd go, turn to the actress and say, "Tell us what to do." And
Natalie directed the whole thing.
It was, they're tough things to shoot. That was more intimidating than the driving sense was walking across the set naked, or and the two of us trying to choreograph a sex scene. It was interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Left a bit, right a bit.
How about you, Daniel?
Well, the scenes with the teeth. Well, all the scenes were with the teeth.
Hospital?
No, sometimes hospital, and
The
also
lung
the
thing?
first press conference. Oh yeah, the lung thing was unpleasant, and the first press conference, because sometimes we couldn't shoot chronologically, so we had to shoot this press conference. It's a beautiful scene, but we had to shoot it. It was the fourth day, I think.
Yeah.
So you had to anticipate the journey of the character, and then jump into something from the very end.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful scene. I love that scene, and I love the fact that he is there, and I don't realize that he's there, and that beautiful punch that you give to the but you shouldn't. You shouldn't.
Don't
you
give
have
it
to
away.
see the movie. So.
Yeah, that was a great day to see you rise to that, because from a production standpoint, we had to do it in that way.
I know.
It was a cost thing,
Yeah.
and I think for me the most challenging thing was the whole the final sequence. As I said, it has emotional, psychological demands. So there are acting challenges. Then the logistics of it were truly dangerous, because the way we shot that scene, which is a wet race in the rain, we were shooting in England, and every time it rained, instead of going home, I would say, we're going to Japan. And that's what we would do. It would become a wet race, and that's where we did have any of our near misses. We had some spin outs, so it was physically dangerous, and it was also logistically very demanding. We were all, and just the storytelling, the music, Hans Zimmer's score, everything needed to sort of come together. The harmonics of that were really challenging, and it's one of the most challenging sequences that I've ever been involved in. And again, I think it surprises people. It's got twists and it's unconventional, but it was part of the and I found it directorially kind of nerve-wracking, and when it suddenly become everybody's favorite race. Which is great, because it's the last one in the movie, but it wasn't necessarily traditional. It didn't unfold in a way that gave me confidence that it necessarily would be.
Do you like feeling like that? Do you like kind of being in a slightly scared place as a director? And
Well, almost every movie scares the shit out of you at some point in some way, because it's just they're challenges. They're elusive. They take on a life of their own. I care about it from my own perspective, but I also care about everybody who's committed their, this portion of their career to a movie. But this story, it kept yielding so many surprises. We kept learning new things that we knew were cool, And so there was a kind of a creative excitement going on, and I'm thrilled by the way people are responding to the movie. I hope it's commercially successful. That would be fantastic. But creatively, it's one of the highlights of my life, and I've had some great experiences. So I really did love getting to do this, and yet it was scary in some way, shape, or form every day.
Just wondering, as actors, is it harder to portray a character who's real or a fictional character?
Well, it depends. I mean, on the one hand, it felt a bit frightening at the beginning, because I felt this weight on my shoulder and the responsibility of playing a legend in my country. I mean, Niki Lauda is huge in Germany. He's an icon, and so it made me a bit nervous. But then, if you have a good relationship with this person and he is willing to answer you any question you would have, and he likes the idea of you portraying him, then it makes life much easier. Because then you can't get any better information than from the living source. So he would tell me things that you can't read anywhere, see anywhere, and became really close. So it's helped me a lot.
does he like the film? Has he seen it?
Yeah, he likes it.
Yeah.
He's very, he's not a man who gets very emotional.
Really?
He just says, "Oh, it's good." Yeah, but that means a lot, No, he's very pleased, I think.
He told me that it made him. I think the first time he saw it, it was unexpectedly emotional, and I think he almost didn't know, how to process that, because the hospital and everything that he went through there was something that he had never really looked back on. He's not the kind of person who does look back. He doesn't even keep He doesn't even have any of his trophies or awards from all those championships. I
Yeah.
mean, no, he's marching ahead at all times, which I think is a, there's a lesson in that for us as well. But this movie forced him to look back, and I think it was unexpectedly moving for him.
Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time, but I've got one more question, which I've got to ask you, because there's a lot of people come down here, filmmakers in the making, and would like some advice from you in terms of what would your advice be for young filmmakers?
Oh, well, believe it or not, it always comes back to story. So everything you do to try to understand that, from reading the newspaper, looking at documentaries as well as fiction, reading, look at the movies that you like, and then look at them again, and then watch them again with no sound and see how they were filmed, all of that. And then begin making films, because today you have the technology to be very experimental on your own. You don't have to expose it to anybody, but be shooting, be editing, and be writing. Just all the time. You'll find your voice, and you'll find that group of collaborators who will sort of help you elevate your work. And they're just, it's more democratic than ever, and just enjoy it. But it's story in my mind, which always really begins with character.
And this is a great example of it. Thank you so much for your time today, and congratulations on an
Thank you.
incredible film.
Thank you.
Daniel, Chris, and Ron, everyone. Thank you for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thank you.